All right, so we're going to close with the Jamais Cascio, and hopefully he'll talk about one of the really interesting projects that he's got going on this fall called Superstruct. Is that part of your conversation at all, Jamais?
I can certainly make it part of the conversation.
I think you should tell everybody about that great game that's going on. I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, folks. William Gibson once said, "The street finds its own uses for things." And it occurred to me that one of the two big themes that emerged, probably somewhat accidentally, from this day is that of unintended consequences. You know, the notion that we're doing these really complex things, and complex things have complex results. Often, probably usually, not quite what we expect. And to steal something from Jonas this morning, you're talking about brains, bots, and bodies. I'd like to add one more. Brains, bots, bodies, and bugs. Not bugs in the fruit fly brain sense, but bugs in the malware and mistakes, spam. And I think that as we look at the evolution of these technologies, it's very likely that these issues around mistakes, these issues around bugs, will become, in many respects, the predominant perspective on some of these technologies. Not because that's what we want, not because that's, an ideal situation, but because these are complex systems. One thing that I noticed in some of the talks, and something I've noticed in a lot of the kinds of presentations around these technologies historically, is a perception that these are magic. In the Arthur C. Clarke sense of a sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And by magic, I don't mean the Harry Potter round glasses type, but the sense that these things work beautifully. That these things will be more perfect than people, more perfect than the other machines. I mean, the cell phones and laptops and blue screens of death and things like that. We are often often ready to assume, eager to assume that these things will work exactly the way we want them to. And the unfortunate truth is they won't. But in that unfortunate truth, in that pathway of not working precisely how we want them to, is the opportunity for epiphany, the opportunity for these kinds of technologies to work in just radically surprising and wonderful ways as well. One of the parallel aspects of thinking about these as magical technologies is we think about them as isolated. We think about robotics, we think about the semantic web, nanotechnology, as something, as a silo in and of themselves. And not just in the sense of, advances in nanotechnology will obviously affect advances in robotics, et cetera. But in the sense of what happens in the rest of the world? What are the developments in the broader social, and political, and economic environment that will shape the advent of these kinds of technologies? This is a hard question, but it's probably the most important question that we can ask right now. Because these are social technologies. Even if we don't think of them as being the latest version of Facebook, these technologies are socially derived. Technology is a social construct. Technology is a political construct. Bruce raised this issue somewhat tangentially, but it's actually really critical to focus on. Everything we make has a political aspect. And by political, I don't mean partisan. I don't mean Republican or Democrat or Labor or conservative or whatever. I mean there's a question of power and control. You write a piece of software, you design a particular new system, and you make a choice as to what is relevant and what is not, what you will include and what you will discard. And very often, your choices as to what is relevant, what is important, what is useful, come from your personal history, your inherent biases, not in a bad sense, but simply your individual people. And your various teams of programmers are collections of individuals with their own perspectives on the world. And it's very easy to slip into the sense that all of these are wonderfully neutral. Technology is inherently neutral. It's apolitical. Bullshit. Technology has biases that we may not recognize. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing. We should avoid biases. We need to recognize that they're there. Because in the recognition of these biases, we can start to spot ways in which the technology will be abused. It gets into these ethical questions. We're going to see increasingly, as these systems move from the flights of fancy to the prosaic reality. I think I twittered in response to some of the developments in the nano panel that we're dealing with the tragedy of the plausible. That these technologies are moving from the magical space to the space where we have to work with the dirty details, the incremental advances. And we have to start dealing with the ethical questions. Now, it's been one of my philosophical elements when you think about new technologies. The people who create these technologies are very often not the ones you want to ask when you're wondering, what can you do? Because they have very set notions. I built this, I designed this for this particular reason, and that's what people will use it for. The reality is that the people you want to ask about how technology is used are the hackers, the makers, the griefers, the people who look for ways to open up and abuse these technologies, because every technology ultimately can be opened up and abused. And in many respects, this capacity to open up and abuse is maybe one of the ways that we can advance the systems. Human behavior matters. And human behavior is a hard problem. You think nanotech is a hard problem. Human behavior is a hard problem. That's why I kind of chuckled at the notion that we'll have, our PDAs will be our best buds, in the next 15 years. Not because the technology won't be there, but because actually developing a system that you'd want to be friends with is really bloody hard. Just think about how much of our brains, just what the proportion of our brains that's used simply to understand other people. In language and modeling behavior, mirror neurons, the capacity to model other minds in our own mind. This is a complex and difficult problem, and it's something that we are pursuing. And so we're at this really interesting point of a nexus of sophistication and ubiquity. We have these technologies around us and in development that are, that surround us, penetrate us and bind the galaxy together. These technologies that are ways, prisms, perspectives, ways through which we view the world. And these technologies are becoming increasingly sophisticated and complex in ways that we're not necessarily quite ready to understand. Now, in some respects, these technologies offer a heroic vision. I think the Pyrex notion is this is actually kind of a heroic concept of using these new technologies, the network technologies, the social technologies, as a way to transform the democratic system. That's very cool. But more often, the technologies are used, hacked, griefed in less heroic ways. And I come back here to spam, malware. It is exceedingly likely that nearly all of the technologies we talked about today will have an unpleasant spam manifestation. So Jonas, when you put up the slide of the end of advertising, I'm sorry, my friend, it's only the beginning. You think about, if we have agents, software agents in the semantic web roaming all over the internet doing wonderful things for us, that suggests to me not that advertising goes away, but that you start having advertisements aimed at the agents to draw the agent's attention. We're developing these technologies that basically spread the need to attract our attention, just to every platform, every kind of system. There has yet to be a communication system that has not in some way developed some kind of spam or advertising. And it's getting increasingly difficult to differentiate between the two. I've basically stopped doing so. So we think about what would nano spam look like? Faber spam. What would a hacked robot be like? And we raise the issue of hacking into robots, and that sounds really scary when you're talking about a military system. But what happens when you hack a car? We're moving away from the concept of the R2-D2 model of robots into this the notion of autonomy as being the core of robotics. But it's actually more semi-autonomy. And you have this ability to go in and fiddle with things, to hack the system. And that changes behavior in unexpected ways. So spam. Now, we didn't talk much about it, although there were some tangential connections to it. The augmented reality, this notion of being able to view the world around you, but with layers of data. Cool stuff. Really neat things that are under development. You actually saw a fairly cool augmented reality application for the iPhone. The camera on one side, and you basically move it around, and there is this virtual object that, as far as you're concerned, looking through the iPhone, is there, and you can manipulate it, and it moves relative to you're moving the phone around. I understand there's something very similar that has been or is in development for the Google phone. This is an emerging a system that combines a lot of the things we've been talking about. And you start thinking, well, what are the spam manifestations of an augmented reality? So you're walking around town, you have your super glasses on, or as Werner Vinge has in Rainbow's End, your little digital contact lenses. And you look around, and the system recognizes what you're seeing so that when it pops up an advertisement, it can layer it on the side of the bus properly. Or it can, put it over on somebody's T-shirt. Not that they're actually wearing the ad on their T-shirt, but it was a blank space. It's put an ad there. So, what do you do? Well, you make a spam filter. I mean, how many people here have a TiVo or a DVR? So you probably, so a little less than half the room. Actually, I'm kind of surprised. What you probably do is when you get to the point where there's an advertisement in the show, you hop over it. You fast forward, or you use the 30-second skip, that hack that you can give to your TiVo. You guys all know that you can hack the TiVo to add a 30-second skip, right? I'll tell you how to do it afterwards if you're interested. Start playing a recorded command, play, command, 30, command. That'll do it. You'll start blocking out the advertisement. Except when we start looking at these kinds of really sophisticated, complex technologies, you're not just blocking out the ads on this tiny little screen or on the big screen in front of you. You're blocking out ads that you see around you. And because the systems have to recognize the moving locations of physical objects and your own moving perspective relative to them, that suggests that it has to be able to identify different kinds of objects. Well, that's interesting. Can we block out other things? Can I block out, I never want to see any kind of advertisement, even a paper billboard, or a logo on a T-shirt, or I don't ever want to see a Republican again. If you add sort of tie your augmented reality into a database system so it actually can start recognizing people, and it like spots somebody who gave a donation to the Palin in 2016 campaign, and you just get a little blur. Or substitute the appropriate political party of your preference. The point here is that you start to be able to block reality. You start to create your own realities as an unanticipated consequence, an unintended consequence of the kinds of devices that are almost inevitable, the kinds of devices that are well underway, that have moved from being Hollywood future technologies to banal future technologies. And to some respect, that's the other theme that I noticed for today, is this tension between the Hollywood future, the fancy devices that can create heroic things that can remake the world, and the plausible, banal future. Now, something that I've noticed in my own industry is that increasingly futurists have a bias towards the banal. So I was telling Christine Peterson earlier today that most of the futurists that I know, most of the people who are in this forecasting, foresight scenario world, actually have not been terribly frightened by the economic downturn. They haven't been saying, it's the end of the world. It's what is it that Greenspan said yesterday? It was a credit tsunami. These things happen. And it's because, I realized, it's because we have this bias towards the banal. That is, we have actually sort of developed a reflexive sense in our work that things that look really big and exciting right now almost always fade in importance. So that 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road, something that we were all, it was a headline for everyone, we were all crapping our pants about, it was a problem, but we got over it. Or it's a problem and we were dealing with it, more likely. And this is something that I think is actually very relevant to a lot of the technologies we're talking about today, is because when we talk about the future of artificial intelligence, the future of really sophisticated nanotechnologies or robotics, we kind of had this image of what does the world look like when we have desktop fabbers and we have robots washing our dishes and A, B, C, D, X. And what we imagine is a world that's very divergent from today. And that's very exciting, very scary, very transformative, and Hollywood. But we don't leap from today to 2030. We move from today to 2030 1 minute at a time. And so by the time we get to 2030 with magical AIs and super robots and nano machines that can feed the dog, it's going to seem almost boring because we will have seen all these incremental steps along the way. You're talking, John was talking about his kids, and there's a concept that I've been playing with for a while that I think fits a lot of what we're talking about today, and that is technology. The definition of technology is anything that was invented after you turn 13. It's basically something that is a surprise to you. I mean, how many people think about electricity as a technology? And yet it was a radical transformation. Or the city as a technology. And yet it was. And so the kinds of things that feel shocking and disruptive to us because we saw their origin, we saw the evolution, aren't going to seem terribly disruptive or interesting to subsequent generations because it was something that was always there. They don't think about having to add internet technology to whatever they're building because, of course, it's there. You'd be insane not to put it there. What are you, some crazy old person? And yet, throughout all of this, we think about this tension between the exciting, the Hollywood and the banal. We think about but when you combine that, when you think about the Hollywood and the banal, and then you combine that with what we were talking about earlier, the unanticipated consequences, the unintended results, what you get is a world where when you do have surprises, they're almost always catastrophic collapse type surprises. What we're seeing right now with the credit system. It was, the various pieces came together in a way that when they seemed resilient, they seemed sturdy, and then avalanche. So what that says to me, sort of apply that logic then to robotics, apply that logic to nanotechnology. One of the notes that I took throughout today was that probably the biggest issue that all of these technologies are going to have to deal with is liability, insurance. Christine, there was something that Christine posted on the Foresight. Is she still here? And she posted on the Foresight website recently about there was an insurance company that has announced that it will no longer insure any companies working with nanotech. Now, that's actually kind of interesting. What's to stop, as we see the development of more sophisticated robots with more of a potential to do harm, and intended or otherwise? What's to stop an insurance company from saying, no, I don't think we want to insure the work that you're doing anymore. You're not going to be able to get business insurance. That's actually kind of a big deal. And it may end up being that as we think through all of the huge, transformative, frightening issues around these kinds of technologies, will we end up at a singularity? Will robots take over and stick us all into pods? Or more of a, what you'll be hearing about tomorrow, will they decide that we're just not interesting and they could better use our atoms for more computronium? It may well be that the biggest challenge to all of these technologies over the course of the next 20 years is simply the issue of insurance. So what does all this mean for emerging technology? The workshop that we're having today, all of these kinds of things that you heard about today, that you're going to hear about tomorrow, that you read about, and that a lot of you are probably working on in your everyday lives. Well, there are a couple of implications. Never assume that what you want or intend with the technology is what people will do with that technology. That seems like a really basic idea, but again, it has some really strong, powerful, surprising implications. If you've built something with you have in your head this elaborate ecosystem for exactly how this technology works, then somebody comes in and screws it up by deciding to do something completely different with it, and possibly doing something that makes more money. And suddenly this elaborate ecosystem that you'd come up with, this set of checks and balances to make sure that there were no abuses, out the window. So it's always helpful, healthy, smart. When you're designing something, when you're working on the emergence of a new system, to really start thinking through, how could this be abused? How could people use this in ways that I don't want them to use this or might surprise me? Make that part of your design process. Make that part of your implementation and deployment process. How can this be used in unexpected ways? The other is never assume that the technology exists in a vacuum. And I talked about the politics a bit earlier. One thing that leapt out just in the last conversation about robots is that one vacuum that you may assume is there is that, oh, we're all Americans here. We'll just think in terms of the United States. Well, not every military, not every society operates under the same rules. And as we've seen with a variety of issues over the past 4 to 8 years, not all organizations within the government operate under the same rules. The issues around torture. The rules for the CIA are very different from the rules for the military, but all they want to talk about are the military rules, which lay out very specific restrictions. It would not at all surprise me to discover that something like the CIA, whether it's the United States or somewhere else, and I'm not trying to cast particular nationalist aspersions here, that an organization like that would love to have semi-autonomous, fully autonomous machines to limit the number of people who would be in the loop if you're trying to do something that's not necessarily entirely legal. And it's these kinds of questions, these notions of ethics, these notions of politics, these notions of just the social relationship of the technology, the behavior, the human behavior that drives the invention, the deployment, the use and ultimately the discarding of these technologies that are ultimately far more important than figuring out precisely which widgets fit together. It is incumbent upon us as people in this field, whether you are a working technologist, whether you are a designer, a journalist, whether you are sort of a flaky dilettante like me, it is incumbent upon you to think through the implications, to recognize that your actions have meaning. We have developed as a society kind of a knee-jerk assumption that the future is something that happens to us. It happens. But the future is something that we create with every choice and every moment. And when we give up our agency, when we say, oh, well, it'll take care of itself, or we'll let the government take care of us, we'll let the big companies take care of us, we'll let the open source movement take care of it. When we give up that agency, we're giving up our right to shape the future. Everyone in this room, by your very act of showing up today, has put a stake down, has essentially declared that you are interested in creating the future, whether or not you necessarily recognize that you're doing so. As you leave today, as you sit there tomorrow and listen to the wonderful speakers, as you think through the implications of these technologies, start thinking explicitly, clearly, and on an ongoing fashion about your role in shaping that technology, and more importantly, your role in integrating these technologies with the society at large. This is a remarkable moment in human history. This transition from the fantastic to the banal, this emergence of the nexus of sophistication and ubiquity, this moment in time where we are creating the tools to recreate the world is something that is a gift to you, is something that puts into your hands the opportunity to build exactly the kind of future that you want to pass on. Jonas Salk, inventor of the polio vaccine, once asked the question, are we being good ancestors? And I think that is a question that we, especially those of us in this particular set of disciplines, we need to ask every day. It's a choice that I'm making, one that lets me be a good ancestor to my own offspring or just to the subsequent generations on this planet. What was fascinating to me about today is just that sense of incipient transformation. The point of almost recognizing that, as Stuart Brand put it, we are as gods, we may as well get good at it. This is a remarkable moment, and I thank you for letting me share this remarkable day.